Welcome to the Dark Wilderness, where we share first-hand encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter you would like to share, please leave it in the comments, or you can email it to us in the link below. If you like today's stories, please gently slap that like button and rattle in that notification bell so you can be alerted each time we upload new content. Now, let's get into today's encounters. So this story is actually my cousin's story. It takes place late October 2019 during the muzzleloader whitetail season here in Manitoba. So that morning we had gone out by the small town of Woodridge, which is located about 120 kilometers southeast of Winnipeg. And it's an area we've hunted quite a bit over the last few years, so we're both very familiar with it. That morning he sat in one of my stands that had been very productive through the archery season and very early muzzleloader season, but he just didn't see anything that he wanted to fill his tag with. So after the morning hunt, we did kind of what we always do out there. Hopped in the truck, went to cruise some of the back trails, went and explored new areas for future hunting locations for the next year, the year after, and so on. Basically just killing time until the evening hunt. So it's a couple hours before dark. We decided, okay, you know what, we gotta figure out what we're doing for tonight. So we're talking about where we're gonna go. A friend of mine has a really nice stand that overlooks a clearing about 175 yards long, 150 yards wide, and it's full of wild grass, wild oats. So it just draws in the deer in that area. And I haven't had a chance to sit there, so I said to my cousin, I said, you know what, I'm gonna sit in Buddy's stand tonight, but I have a wood stand that's about 3/4 of a mile south of where I'm gonna be if you wanna go there. So my cousin said, you know what, yeah, I'll go there. He has walked in there with me before, so he knew exactly where it was, and he was fairly familiar with the area. So we get into the truck, and we make our way down the small, windy quad trail. And now this trail is very narrow. The first couple 100 yards is through a pine plantation where the pines actually close in onto the center of the trail. So unless you have a quad or a truck that's specifically just for hunting, that you don't care if you get scratched or dinged or banged up, your only other option is to walk down there. Well, luckily, my truck that I use for hunting is one of those trucks that I don't care if it gets dinged, banged, scratched, or whatever. So we hopped in the truck, made our way down the trail. After about 200 yards, you get to a dry creek bed, which is normally dry. Well, thankfully this year it was dry, so we made our way down the creek bed, then back up without getting stuck. And then right after you cross that creek bed, the trail opens up to the right. On the right hand side, it's all the young pine plantation, and on your left, it's full of it's an old growth pine plantation on the left hand side. So we continued down this trail, and we went probably about another 500 yards, and you get to a spot where the trail just completely narrows in on itself. And that part of the trail, even with a quad, you're not going to get through there. It's just loaded with fallen dead timber just stacked on top of each other all the way down this trail. So I dropped my cousin off, wished him luck, turned the truck around, and headed back the way I came. So now my cousin's all alone. Now, my cousin hasn't been hunting for as long as I have. I'm 38, I've been hunting since I'm 8, so I've been hunting for about 30 years, whereas my cousin at the time was only 19. And he had gone with my uncle, who was his grandfather, for a few years before my uncle, which is his grandfather, passed away, and I kind of took him under my wing and took him out hunting with me and my buddy. So after I drove away, my cousin started making his way down this narrow trail, having to step over that fallen timber. So he walks down this trail trying to be as quiet as possible. And as he's going down the trail, he hears the typical forest sounds. He hears birds tweeting, he hears squirrels barking in the distance. He even spooked up a couple of deer that blew at him. If you don't know what a deer blow sounds like, and you've never heard one before, if you're walking in the bush and that happened, it'll probably freak you out. It's like a loud, it's loud. So we heard quite a few of those as he was walking in, because no matter how quiet you are while you're walking through the forest, deer are gonna know you're there. Even if you have the wind blowing towards you, their hearing is so much better than ours, their sight is so much better than ours, and their sense of smell so much better than ours. You can minimize the effects, but you'll never completely eliminate them. So the deer knew he was there, so he spooked a few up, and he actually saw a couple that he could have taken a shot at, but he told me that he wasn't going to take the shot because it wasn't an ethical shot. So that was a definite bonus to hear from him. So anyway, he makes his way down this trail, and after about 200 yards, the trail slowly opens up. And from that entrance of the trail to that clearing, about 25 yards to the right, is where this wood stand is that we built. And that stand goes about 12 feet up this big, thick poplar. So he gets into the clearing, turns, makes his way to that stand, climbs up, and settles in for the hunt. So he sat there for a couple of hours and didn't see anything. So now it's about an hour before dark. He decides he's going to give a couple of grunts and see if he can maybe bring a buck into him. So he pulls out his extinguisher deer call, blows a couple of soft tending grunts, followed by a couple longer deep grunts, and almost instantly he hears noise ahead of him, about 75 yards, and then off into the pines. And he hears this noise coming towards the clearing, and he can hear heavy footfalls as it's coming. So he's thinking he just called it a big buck. So he starts to get his muzzleloader ready, and he's waiting, because he's waiting for that noise, which he's hoping is a buck, is going to walk out into that clearing, and then he just has to lift the muzzleloader up the rest of the way and take his shot. So he's getting excited. His heart's just a pounding, and he's waiting. He lifts his muzzleloader up a little bit more. All of a sudden, the footsteps stop. Nothing. No noise, no nothing. So he's thinking to himself, did I just get busted? He's like, there's no way I could get busted, because right in front of the stand there's these big pine boughs that come down. It almost gives you like a little window to shoot through. So if there's something in that clearing, you're pretty obscured and they can't see you. So he's thinking to himself, how did I get busted? So he slowly lowers the muzzleloader down. Now he's mad because he figures he's just blown that chance at that buck that was coming through the pines. So he's sitting there and he's waiting, and about 30 seconds later he hears those footsteps again, but now they're heading away from the clearing back into the pines. So now he's really kind of ticked off, and he's thinking, great, like I just blew a chance at this big deer, even though he never actually saw said deer. So he's sitting there, and a few minutes later all of a sudden he can hear the footsteps coming again, but this time instead of coming towards the clearing, they're coming through the pines but towards him. So he's sitting there in the stand listening to this thing come towards him, and he's starting to get a little excited because he's figuring for sure it's this big buck, right? So as its noise is coming, he gets to about 25 yards from him, and so now he starts to get his muzzle loader. He's starting to get excited, so he's starting to go like this, and also he hears a whoosh, and he looks up, and there's this log about 4.5 feet long by about 6 inches round hurling through the air towards him, and it slams into a tree right beside him. Slams into the tree, hits the ground. My cousin freaks out, quick gets his muzzleloader up because now he's wondering what could throw a log like that. So he's getting ready, and he's watching, and he hears nothing. And then he notices that everything around him has gone dead quiet. So now he's super nervous, and acting out of fear, he actually jumped off the tree stand, which is 12 feet off the ground. He somehow didn't break his ankle when he hit the ground. Well, he hits the ground and he just runs back the way he came. Now, as I said before, I was 3/4 of a mile from him, but that's 3/4 of a mile as the crow flies. So to get back to me, he had to run down this zigzagging old quad trail, which the whole distance between where he was and where my truck was parked was about 2 miles. So he ran just sprinting down this quad trail. He said the entire time he felt like he was being watched, stalked, hunted. He couldn't even describe it with the feeling that he had, just that it was a total feeling of dread. Well, of course I'm up in my stand, so I don't know what's going on. I have no idea anything's gone on. So I'm sitting in my stand. Now it's starting to get dark, And there's a few minutes left of legal light. I haven't seen anything, so I'm like, I'm just gonna head back to the truck. So I climb down the stand, I walk across my field, get to my little trail, walk a couple hundred yards back to my truck, and here's my cousin standing there. He's just dripping sweat, and he's like freaking out. He's telling me to open the truck. He says he wants to get in and just wants to get out of there. Asked him what happened, like why are you all shaking up, figuring, maybe he came across a bear, maybe it was, I know he has a bit of a fear of coyotes, and there was a lot of coyote activity about 10 minutes before. So he said, no, not a bear, not a coyote, and he tells me that story. Well, whatever this was has shooken him up so bad that he has refused to go back into that area ever since. He said he won't even go in there if there's 3 or 4 other guys armed during deer season. He refuses to go in there. And it's too far for me to walk in myself to pull that old wooden stand that we built out, because that thing weighs probably about 140 pounds. So that stand is still up in that exact spot today, and it's now 2022. But yeah, so according to my cousin, there is something in the woods out by Woodridge that doesn't like people, especially hunters, and his advice is, if you're in the area, just be cautious, be aware of your surroundings at all times. Well, that's it for today's encounter. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.